Welcome to Witch Hunt, the podcast about historical witch hunts and the modern persecution of people accused of witchcraft. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack. In 1933, a small Portuguese town witnessed a horrific act of violence, the burning of a woman accused of witchcraft.
Arminda de Jesus was 32 years old, a mother of two young children, known for her kindness and for helping her troubled neighbor. But on a February night, that same neighbor would accuse her of being a witch, setting in motion events that would end in tragedy.
This wasn't a case from the distant past, yet the story has been largely forgotten, even in Portugal.
Today we're joined by Dr. Inês Tadeu from the University of Madeira, who has been working to uncover Arminda's story and ensure she is not forgotten.
Through the trial records, newspaper accounts, and Dr. Tadeu's research, we'll explore how superstition and fear led to murder in 20th century Portugal, and why some communities still struggle to confront these dark histories.
Content warning. This episode contains descriptions of violence and murder.
As we seek justice for victims of witch persecution, we believe it's crucial to remember stories like Arminda's, not just as historical events, but as warnings about how quickly fear can turn to violence in any era.
We're grateful to have Dr. Tadeu with us today to help shine a light on this important case.
Thank you for coming to Witch Hunt Podcast. It was so nice to see you at the Witchcraft and Human Rights Conference in Lancaster. Can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here and for this opportunity. My name is Inês Tadeu, and I've been a lecturer at the University of Madeira, my alma mater, for 24 years now. And as an undergraduate, that's when I was introduced by one of my professors to the topic of witch hunts and women suffering more with witch hunts throughout history, particularly Anglo-American culture. And then last year, I completed my PhD, my doctoral thesis, with another University of Madeira. And in that thesis, I explored the representation of the woman as witch from Salem, in 19th century historical fiction by 19th century American women authors. It's a mouthful, I know. And my research, I'm not an historian, but I am a cultural researcher. So I always have a preference for finding the history behind the historical fiction. And I like how historical fiction most of the times counter-memorializes, especially the women. So it gives them a new life. For example, in my doctoral thesis, all of the Salem historical figures of Salem get a new life. They are redeemed. They are made whole in a way. I enjoy that. And that's how I ended up finding the story that I'm hoping to tell today. Arminda de Jesus. I was reading about the play, which was written by a famous Portuguese playwright, Bernardo Santareno. And I come to find out that behind that play, that was also turned into a movie, there's a real story. And when I went to find out the story, that's when I found Arminda de Jesus and her tragic ending. So I hope that my aim with my work is to try and give visibility to the historical figure behind the fictional character. And it doesn't only have to be. So I enjoy particularly women that are seen as evil or characterized as evil or monsters, with some form of, that engage in some form of inversionary behavior or seen as inversionary behavior. And I like to go and see, okay, what's behind this? Why are they being characterized like this? So that's how I came to meet, so to speak, or find out about the story that I would like to share with you today.
Thank you. We think that's so important to talk about the humans that these people were, rather than the stereotypes that they're so often portrayed as.
Exactly. That's what I try to do. And I've learned a lot from that professor of mine Zina Abreu, was her name. She's retired now, and she became one of my advisors. And that's one of the things I learned from her. Behind the costumes and the Disney film, you know what else, the representation of women as witches that is done by popular culture is quite often offensive and completely disregards that that are real victims there. And in Portugal, it's even a little bit more like that. A lot of my colleagues will say that, oh, you're the one who's studying the little witches, as bruxinhas. It feels almost dismissive to me because it's as if no one wants to admit today that they were real women and they suffered and their stories deserve to be told and recognized. And that's why I'm really taken by the story of today of Arminda de Jesus, because it just feels like no one is, not even her own family, because this is not a 19th century or 17th century story. It's a 20th century story in Portugal. And no one is reclaiming her memory. So I'm hoping that, even though I'm not an historian, I'm hoping to at least put a spotlight on her and so that people can know what happened to her.
Thank you. What do we need to know about Portugal to understand this 20th century, as you pointed out, witchcraft persecution?
Some historians, especially this ethnographer from Oxford University, and his name is Pina Cabral. He actually did a study in the 80s. He actually lived in Portugal, in the northern area of Portugal, because there's also like different cultural regions, let's say. And in his ethnographical study, you can see how, so he's talking about food and marriage and this and that. And then he said a whole chapter dedicated to the evil. Like, how do people in Portugal deal with the evil? So that already should point out that he felt the necessity to add a whole chapter to discuss that. So the thing that I think we need to know about Portugal is this, especially in the 20th century. People don't discuss it openly, but most people are superstitious and believe in witchcraft, mainly bad witchcraft. People don't discuss it openly, but they do go to witch doctors. And so people don't discuss it openly, but they do fear certain books. And in the first half of the 20th century, in certain parts of Portugal, such as the northern part, where the story of today happened, it was even more so. It's like, we don't have doctors. We don't go to doctors. We have problems. How do we deal with it? We go to a witch. We go to a cunning man or a wise man or a wise woman or a cunning woman. And we are Catholic. We are extremely Catholic. But at the same time, we also believe that the devil is around us, which is actually a very normal thing to think, right? If you believe in God, you have to believe in the devil, right? Yeah, that's what Portugal is. So even today, for example, Halloween is coming up. There will be certain things found, certain items that are indicative of rituals being done at certain cemeteries. But no one knows who does it. No one wants to deal with it. And no one wants to mess with it, basically. Which I think it's one of the reasons that Arminda ended up being so forgotten. It was literally like, we can't talk about that. It's like opening an insidious door to something and we don't want to mess with that. But yeah, it's still present. It's very below the surface, but the superstition of evil witchcraft and all that, it's still there. People laugh at it, dismiss it, say, oh, don't be ridiculous, but they fear it. So that's what I would say. And like I said, if we had to read through Pina Cabral's work, we can actually see that. Like I said, he dedicated a whole chapter to it. That's how important it is. Portugal and how they deal with evil. So that's my opinion on that.
How did you first come across her story?
So I already knew of the play by Bernardo Santareno. It's one of the plays that you study in high school often as a Portuguese subject. And then I found out, there's a movie as well, a noir movie made in the 1960s about. But then I found this reference that he got inspiration from a real story that he had seen and heard of as a child and the newspapers and that, because it was at that time that it happened it was a sensation thing. It was really sensationalist. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. So you want to tell me that there's something behind us. And that's when I went to dig, and then that's when I found the trial the transcript of the trial. And then later in 2018, there was a bit of an expose done by a newspaper, a big newspaper here in Portugal, the Observador. But it was just basically just narrating. So they don't confirm or not confirm. They just report on the story. And it caught my attention. But at that time, I was too busy with my doctoral dissertation. And I'm like, okay, at a later time, I will have a better look into this. Until I did last year, because I did a presentation on the movie and how the movie completely counter-memorializes Arminda de Jesus to oblivion. Like, it's not her anymore. It's just this completely fictional character. But even Bernard Santareno and his recreation of Arminda still keeps the one essential point. A woman was burned to death alive in Portugal in 1933. And most people were shocked to find out at the presentation, and most people still are today. They really never think that happened in Portugal, except for the Inquisition back in the 15th century, 16th century. But even then, when you read the historians like Pedro Paiva, they still underscore that there was no witch hunts per se. And it was more an heretic cleansing with the new Christians or the Jewish people. And you never have the kind of outbreaks that you tend to identify, for example, in England or in Germany or even in Spain or Scotland, etc. Yeah, that's how I came across his story, because I was reading this one play and then I found out. And then I found online, because luckily it's been digitalized, the transcription of the trial. And I was just horrified and taken by it at the same time, because no one is talking about this. They mention it like it's just something that happened. There's no true, like, why did this happen? There's no one getting saddened by it or even discussing it at all. So I thought, well, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can at least put her in some database, or if I can get a publication in a journal, at least her name will be there. Someone will remember that Arminda de Jesus died in that way. So yeah, that's how I got to find out about this story.
Can you elaborate on the concept of the woman as witch?
Yes, it was a concept that I started working with, that I also applied during the analysis of the women as witches from Salem. It's what Linda Holtz in her book calls that witches, the word itself, there's no feminine or masculine, but there is this presumption that that a woman is a witch, that the witch is normally a woman. And of course, we know that that's not always like that. We know in history, even Professor Davies at the conference was mentioning, there's lots of men that have been named witches and killed for being witches. But it's always much more the woman, right? The woman as witch is that woman that for some reason, sometimes such an innocuous reason, just becomes viewed by her peers for being a witch. It's the woman as witch. She has the appearance of witch because she behaved in a certain way, or she denied something, or she was seen at the wrong time at the wrong place, or etc. And she's not really a witch. There's no powers in it. So just calling her a witch for me felt incomplete. So I always used Linda Holtz's term, woman as witch, meaning woman who is perceived as being a witch, but she's actually no witch. She practiced nothing. We're not even talking about women such as wise women or cunning women, or who could possibly practice sympathetic magic or protective magic. We're not even talking about that. We're just talking about a woman who, for some reason or another, just all of a sudden becomes perceived by her peers, by her community, as being a witch for no palpable reason other than some form of inversionary behavior. And by that, I mean, for example, she speaks her mind, or she didn't go to church on Sunday, or all those. If you read the trials, like I know you did, like the Salem witch trials, we've got so many cases like that. It's like all of a sudden, oh, she must be a witch. So that's what I mean by woman as witch.
What historical records remain about Arminda?
Okay, Minda she passed away. Her demise was in 1933, and just about 14 months later, there was a trial. It was a very speedy trial, in my opinion. It took 2 days only, one day for witnesses and another day basically for wrapping up and sentencing. Because our Portuguese legal system is slightly different from yours, so it wasn't exactly a trial of her peers or of their peers or anything like that. It's a judge that decided. But anyway, the whole thing was so out of the ordinary during a time when we were talking about Estado Novo. So it was the totalitarian fascist period of Portugal under Salazar. And we have this crime that is absolutely, people were like, what's going on? How could that have happened? Not so much because that the people of the population, that area, Soalhaes, actually went and said, look what happened, but the newspapers picked on it. It's always the media, right? The media made a big deal of it. And the trial records, including the inquiry before the trial and the gathering of evidence, and they exist. They are, which is a similar case to Salem witch trials, for example. That's why we know so much about them, because the trial records were preserved. These were preserved too, and they were not lost or buried or anything. They are very much out in the open. They are actually part of an installation at a museum at the Palácio de Justiça, so the court in the court building in Porto, and you can check them, and they've already been digitalized as well. It's there. In the 80s, 2 lawyers from Soalhaes decided that they wanted to, feeling like me, they wanted to make sure that people would know more about it. They actually transcribed. They transcribed all the trial records, as well as the newspaper clippings. And they put it all in this neat little booklet, basically. It's not a very long book. And then the Council of Martinives published it. They paid for it, they published it, and they were actually selling it for a certain time when you would go there. I'm not sure today if that's still happening. I didn't go to Martinives. I went directly to Soalhaes. And they would actually be selling it like, it was a way, so they tried to memorialize it in a way, I would say. And also, the other reason is the play by Bernardo Santarino, because eventually he would say, yes, I got the inspiration from this woman that died in Soalhaes, although he was also quite a character as a playwright. But he would still concede to that, and it's known. That's how I got access to those sources. But I still haven't managed to get a really good grip of the newspaper sources. I read the transcript, but I really want to see the originals. I'm still working on that because it's not as easy as that. And then, of course, the 2018, like I said, these journalists actually went there, but they didn't. I was actually rereading it yesterday just to update my information. And I actually found they're just recounting it with they're being a sensationalist, I would say, as their peers back in the 1930s. There's no, I don't know, it still feels like Arminda doesn't get justice in their recounting, although it's 2018. So yeah, that's where I found the sources. But also in June, I actually went there in person. I reached out to the local government, let's call it, the council of the place where it happened. And I said, can you assist me? Can I go there and all that? And they were surprised and delighted. And because it seems like everyone else knows more about that than that particular place. They just like, really? Are you a university professor and you're looking into this? It's like they don't see the reason, or it's just it's a big joke for the younger generation, because they are still known today as terra do mate e queima, meaning the land where you burn and die, kill and burn. They think of it as a joke, the younger generation, and the older generation, most of them already forgotten about it. And the one person that was still alive in 2018 was a person who was 4 years old when the whole thing happened. And she still, at the time, told the journalist that she barely remembered seeing the woman burnt, and the detail that she remembers seeing the gold hoops just lying on the sides of this Black woman's face, and what else. And that's it. She was the last one, and to have any actual memory of it. Everyone else yeah, they there's no one even took the time to note down the oral history, which I don't understand. No one cared about that. Not even that. Can you imagine you had for almost 90 years all these people that you could have talked to in detail and transcribe what they had to say or save it, do something with that? No. And now there's no one else left. And those who are left heard from their parents or grandparents or great uncle or great aunt, and it just, they don't want to mess with it, really. You feel the resistance, like, no, we don't want to talk about it. So those things happen. That's what the one lady told me. Those things happen. It happens everywhere. It just feels, again, we don't want to mess with that. It's the devil. We are not messing with that. That's what it felt like. I don't know. I think I went on a tangent. I'm sorry.
No, that was really great. And
Okay.
we want Arminda's story to be told the proper way. So would you like to recount the events for us?
Okay, let's see if I can get this right. Arminda de Jesus. So she was 32 years old and the mother of two little children, Manuel and Evangelina. And she was, at the time, her husband was in Brazil, as it was very often in Portugal at that time. The wives would stay with the children and the husbands would migrate to places like Brazil or Venezuela or etc. And she listed as being a farmer, but not in the sense of owning the farm. She was a laborer that would work at farms. Like, they did that a lot at that time as well. They didn't own the farm, but they would work and get paid per day. And she lived right next door to another lady called Joaquina. And Joaquina, unfortunately, also in her 30s, 37, slightly older, and she had actually 6 children. The youngest was still a toddler, not even, it was an infant at the time this whole thing happened. But she had been known for years to suffer these crises. You have different descriptions of it, but if you put it all together, it seems to me that she was epileptic, at least, in the very least, because she would have these shakes and no one could control her, but she would also go into screaming and shouting and saying that she was being tormented. She was, to the naked eye, to the untrained eye, she looked afflicted, really, it seemed. If we, again, based on the different accounts, she almost probably was, I don't know, bipolar or something like that. I don't know. The way that they go on about it. And this had been going on for 3 to 4 years. She would just collapse and then have these crises. And while that was happening, Arminda, her next door neighbor, would actually come over, take care of her. Arminda would babysit the kids because she had her own children. They still were also young. Joaquina's children were also young. She would also do that. She would nurse Joaquina back to health. This is the accounts that you get from the different the trial records, and as well as the newspapers as well. So I wish I could show the picture, but you know what I'm talking about. They really literally live next to each other. It's like as close as possible, right? But that particular year, 1933, Joaquina got really, really bad. It got worse. The crisis got worse. And she kept on saying she's being afflicted. And it just went on. And her husband didn't know what to do. So he asked his brother-in-law. And you might ask, why would he ask that person? Well, that person, based again on the accounts, he seemed to think of himself as, I wouldn't say a witch doctor, but at least what Black Court called the unwitcher. He felt himself like being the person in that area who could help with certain things, because people were starting to think she really was afflicted by spirits, by evil spirits. They didn't think that maybe she needed a doctor or anything. No, because the way that she would act, it just felt like it has to be something else. It can't just be health related, right? So Anastasio Pereira came over with his trusted book, the Book of Saint Cyprian, one of those books that in Portugal you just do not say the name and you do not buy it because it's dangerous. He did some prayers and he did some smudging with olive tree leaves and rosemary bush. It's a very traditional thing in Portugal to smudge the houses with rosemary bush or drink the tea to protect you from evil spirits as well. It's a very, very normal thing. And he tried to do that, but Joaquina didn't respond. She didn't get better. Eventually, and this is interesting because in the trial, they don't mention that, the trial records, but in the newspapers, they do. They eventually called a series of witches. 3 different witches came. None of them, so known, when I say witches, I mean wise women from the neighboring towns. They couldn't help until this one came, this Olivia person, and she was the one who actually went to give her account. And she's like, yes, I'm sorry, but Joaquina is possessed. There's 2 spirits. There's a good one and a bad one. And there's no way to solve this. She's going to be like this forever. But Anastasia insisted. He wanted to help, right? So they did these sessions in that particular month. So the whole thing happened on the 25th of February. So the last days leading up to the 25th, they did a series of, they would invite the family over and they were doing like these prayers, like these rituals at our place. Like they would read from the book and pray from the book and do the smudging. And they did it for a few nights. And what's interesting is this, because there's 2 conflicting accounts, but one actually shows this. Arminda was part of that. She liked her neighbor. She wanted to help Joaquina. She was also in those prayers leading up to the 25th. But on that particular night, she was late for whatever reason. She wasn't there at the same time as everyone else. So everyone else was already experiencing all these things where Joaquina was giving them instructions to lie on the ground, and they look as if they were dead, and then they would come back to life. It was this whole production, this whole show, right? And then that's when she walked in on that particular night, that Saturday, 25th of February, the weekend before what in Portugal we celebrate as being Carnival. And she walked in, and as she was asked to lie on the ground, she had a bad reaction. We can't possibly guess what it was, right? We can only imagine. And again, these are trial records, people saying things, right? And someone took the notes down. We will never know the details unless you were actually there, right? That's always the issue. And she had a bad reaction. She herself started having some sort of affliction. She started laughing. She started crying. She started reacting badly. She started saying she could see these little lights. And at that moment, Joaquina decided that Arminda, who had just walked in and had that bad reaction, she's possessed. And I'm possessed because she's possessed. So if you want to help me, you have to do something about Arminda. And that's where everything took a really bad turn to the worse. Anastasia went with it. And at first, they beat her up. They dragged her out of the house. Not only these men that were all related to Joaquina, but Arminda's brother was also in that group of people who dragged her out of the house. His name was José Monteiro. And they first beat her with it's like these tree branches, these quince sticks, like with these sticks. And those sticks were actually included in the trial evidence. And one of them was actually broken. So they really hit her as hard as possible with those sticks to the point of breaking those sticks, right? And what the whole instruction was, she has to be beaten until she says, "Ay meu Deus, oh my God." And then they stopped. She said that, of course, who wouldn't, right? And they drag her back in. And Joaquina kept on saying, no, she's still possessed. They drag her back out. This is just, every time I say this, it really gets to me, the whole thing. And they dragged her back out again, and they carried on with the beating. But this time, José Monteiro, her brother, was already horrified by this. And he started saying, I think he started to intervene. And that's when he claims that they threatened him. If you do anything to stop us, you next, basically. He just left her. He left her to their devices. And that's when they went and started a fire because she was unconscious. And they just put dried pine needles over her, and they just started the fire. This is where the accounts differ. Some say that it was Joaquina kept on saying that to do that. Others say that Anastasio was the one behind it, the unwitcher guy. The point is, the fire was started and this woman who was still alive got burned to death and no one stopped it. And most people fled in horror. But there's one freakish account that says that actually Joaquina's family were just there looking at it. And they all insist, this is the part that I don't know if they just got together and all came up with the same story, or this is the part where did they really believe? They all insist that they truly believed she was going to come back to life the next day. That they were just, it was a ritual by fire to get rid of the supposed demons, whatever that she had, in order to save Joaquina, right? Others insist that Joaquina was the master of everything. Why did they listen to her? We will never know. Joaquina later is deemed unfit to stand trial because she was institutionalized and they actually believed that she wasn't in her right mind, so she couldn't stand trial. And she had also conflicting information. She would either say, no, I didn't do anything. Or she would say that I have no recollection from that period. Like from the period of 20-something in February all the way through to April, I have no recollection of what happened in my life during that time because I was so ill. But there's also other accounts that she was destroying the room in the institution. Like with her hands, she would tear apart the bedding and all that stuff. So it's, again, unless we actually go and check out those records, which I don't even know where to begin, we don't know. All I know is that why would this group of men listen to this woman so easily? And it has to be, you have to kind of come to grips with, they must have really believed what they were doing. However, the Portuguese authorities struggled with the whole superstition thing, and they tried to find two other avenues for motive. One of the avenues was that Anastasio Pereira had borrowed money from Arminda and her husband, and they wanted to see that maybe that's why he forced the whole situation, so he didn't have to pay back the money. However, they couldn't find any indication that Arminda was asking for the money back. And she actually had a nice, hefty bank account, apparently, at the time. And they didn't see a reason for it that she was pestering Anastasio with that. Another avenue was, and this is interesting because this was suggested by Arminda's widower because he came from Brazil soon after. And he still spoke to the authorities and he was at the trial as well. And he was convinced that Joaquina wasn't crazy and she knew exactly what she was doing because Joaquina had asked Anastasio's wife to go and tell the people that there was going to be a miracle at our house. Like she was premeditating something. That's what he suggested. However, when it came to the trial, it just came down to superstition and a gruesome death. But they still considered it involuntary manslaughter. I don't know, how is that? And the reasons, the defense uses reasons such as, oh, these poor men, yeah, they did what they did, but they are poor and they are stupid and they are superstitious and it's like all these reasons. It's like, I'm sorry, an innocent woman was killed brutally. I don't care about those kind of, oh, they were superstitious. Yeah. After that happened during that night, again, conflicting account. Some say her body was just left there for 2 days. No one did anything. At the doorsteps of Joaquina. And that someone addressed Joaquina, what is this? And that she just casually said, I don't know. It's all horrifying. Others say that the next morning, someone had covered the body with a blanket or something. And people were coming over to see the horrifying scene, to check, was this Arminda? Because everyone knew her. She was a good neighbor. She was loved. In that area, no one had a complaint. At least you can't find in the records. No one said, oh, she was mean. Nothing like that. Everyone keeps on saying, no, we loved her. She was such a good person. And there's also one that claims that Anastasio the unwitcher guy had come over the next morning, and he had a pickaxe, and they were wondering if he wasn't going to just get rid of her remains. But there were so many people around, apparently, that he didn't have a chance. The interesting thing is that when they finally called what in Portugal at that time we used to call o regedor, it's like the closest thing I can think in American culture is like the sheriff, the town sheriff kind of thing, right? It's a small area away from the authorities. So you have this little sheriff guy, and he arrested them, and Anastasio was the only one who resisted arrest. He tried to escape. All the others would just, yeah, we did it, and we're sorry, and we really thought that she was going to come back to life. And he was the only one who didn't want, he tried to, but then he confessed. They all confessed, yeah, but we thought we were doing something good. We were helping Joaquin, and we were helping Arminda. That's the way that it comes out in the trial. Yeah, and then they were found. So the trial took a year, more or less. So between the inquiry and all that, it was a year later that it took place in 1934, May 1934. And it was I would say it's a short trial compared to what happened today, or because it was one day for all the witnesses, and then they had to postpone, and then a second day for so the closing arguments and the decision. And the second day was actually at Mark Canavia's show. Everyone came to watch it. Everyone from around there came to see that. And then at 8:00 at night, I can't imagine a court being open at 8:00 at night today, but at that time, the sentence came out, and they were sentenced. They were all found guilty, and they were sentenced to over 20 years in jail, or they had the option of being exiled to one of the Portuguese colonies. It was a very common thing at the time. You would be sent basically to the edge of the empire kind of thing. And could be Mozambique or Angola or São Tomé and Príncipe also happened, the islands, the African islands. But apparently they chose to stay in Portugal. And they also had to pay, each one of them, the whole of them, the three men had to pay actually a form of restitution to Arminda's family. And it was quite high for the time. 6,000 escudos, so like 6,000. I can't even imagine what that is in today's money. I will have to figure that out. But at that time, it was a lot of money. And again, made me mad to find out again that they didn't stay in prison for the whole sentence, because of 13 years later, 13 years later, there was all sorts of amnesties, and they were given the right they were released. So this woman died the way she did, gets forgotten by everyone, including her family. And these men just got 13 years and went on with their lives. And when the family they really didn't discuss it at all. There was this, in one of the newspaper reports, someone who claimed to the newspaper, to the reporter, that he actually knew he was a nephew by marriage of Angelina's son. And he says, I've never heard Manuel ever speaking about his mother. I don't know if it's the trauma and you just don't want to deal with it, or if it's the shame that you believe that she actually was. I don't know what it is, but to me, it's the family didn't memorialize her either at all. The fact that those houses are still standing is actually amazing. You would think that they would have taken those houses brick by brick down, but apparently Joaquina must have carried on her life as well. I haven't found information if she was institutionalized for the rest of her life or she carried on with her life, because her husband went to prison. So who was going to take care of her and her children? I really want to go down that rabbit hole, find out more about that. But those houses are standing there, right? And people know that nothing happened there. For me, it was because I do that a lot. When I went to Salem, when I went to Pendle Hill, and I like to go and experience the area. Of course, it's 20th century. It's not the same, but I still like to go there and have that feeling. And for me, it was shocking. I kept on telling the lady of the council, the people who assisted me, so this is it. They were that close. I kept on repeating myself because I can't understand Or maybe I can, I don't know. How can people who were so close in every possible way do that to each other and carry on with their lives because they were so convinced that they were doing the right thing? It's scary. But for me, what's more scary and more sad is no one talks. They don't even know about her name there. They actually, from the conversations, a few conversations I had, they seem to conflate the two, Joaquin and Arminda. They just say, oh, she was the crazy lady who was possessed by the demons. And I'm like, wait, no, which one is the crazy? Joaquin was the one who was known as being the crazy, Atula, the fool. Well, that's not Arminda. Arminda was the other one. But it's all conflated. It's all confused. And one of the people, the young woman that was assisting me, that took me around, she went to law school, and she was also telling me that her colleagues from other universities, such as University of Coimbra, which will study. They actually study this case because in the law, it's one of those examples. What do we do with this? How would we defend this? How would we judge this? But in Porto, which is the district of Soalhaes, no one touches that. It's not part of the curriculum. And it's like, why does one university, that particular university? So there's a lot of unanswered questions for me. I think there's still a lot of work. I'm surprised that like I said, I'm not an historian. I'm surprised that no historian in Portugal has picked up on it, do a proper, go through anything, dig it up. I'm going to try and see if I can do more, because recently I found another interesting article, not directly about Arminda and her story, but that the New York Times in 1929 reported that Portugal was having a hard time controlling their witches. And that's not a joke, because I actually thought, is this a joke? That they were trying to, the Portuguese authorities in 1925 at 29 were trying to teach the population to not resort to witches, and they couldn't stop it. They were struggling with it. That's another interesting rabbit hole that I want to go down, because I want to understand, really? I've never read anything about that. Again, in Portugal, unfortunately, with the exceptions of, like I mentioned, Pina Cabral, or another one is Pedro Paiva, very few historians have dedicated themselves to witchcraft or the witch hunts, to be more precise, or any cases. There are cases, but there's very little even paid attention to. It just gets dismissed and disregarded. It's like, yeah, it was just a fluke, or I don't know. But for me, I don't know why. It just, I don't understand how it can just be forgotten like that. How? I don't understand. It should be part of the cultural memory of that place. This person was treated like this, right?
It's quite a powerful story, and it should be known. It's important to know that these things still happen, and so we can try and do something about them. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Okay. I hope I was clear enough, because there's so many events, and I know that I might be rambling, or it might not be as linear or as chronological as possible. It's just that even the trial records and the newspaper clips, the different accounts get a bit conflicting. So you try to, and there's even pamphlets that came out afterwards that they totally just, they go down the sensationalist route, and it's just all these conversations, and you're like, where did they get this? Even the newspaper articles, who did they speak with? There's one that they actually claimed they spoke to Arminda's father, because her parents were still alive at that time, which is another horrifying thing to think about. A mother was lost, a wife was lost, a daughter was lost. And there was no, I don't know, even the Portuguese authorities, taking into consideration what period of history we're talking about in Portugal, I felt like they were just, that was it. It feels so anticlimactic. That was it. That's all you did. Because I grew up, or when you read about history of Portugal at that time, it was the authorities were very strict. And with this case, it just feels like it took them 2 days to get to Marcanaves and take her body, and I don't know what else. And yeah, they arrested them, and they were in prison for a year until the trial. And I'm not saying prison was a nice experience at that time, but it just felt, and then it was like, oh, this poor man, they didn't know better. It just feels like that. And I get so angry at times because that's it. That's it. That was it. Okay. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you wanted to share today to get across?
I just would like that this would be opportunity for more people to know what happened to Arminda, that it happened in Portugal, a country where there's this famous Portuguese author that describes Portugal as being a país de grandes costumes, so a mellowed out country. We don't do revolutions. We're very mellow people. And this happened. Okay, so I feel like there's a big research gap here. There's not enough studies being done about not only the cultural regions, because it's obvious that the north of the country was more into this whole how to defend themselves from evil. I'm sorry. But also the whole thing of witchcraft itself, even today, 19th century, 20th century, the modern day, it's like, that nothing happens. It's just ridiculous, people. It gets dismissed all the time as just being superstition. So I just hope that I mean that there's becomes an eye opener, or at least something to be aware of, that these things happened in a country like Portugal, and they might still be happening, and we might actually not know. It might come out as a different reason. Professor Owen Davies in Lancaster, he was presenting how you actually have to dig through the news in the newspapers, because then you find it's like a reverse witchcraft thing, like someone who feels that they were bewitched. Sometimes there's crimes happening that might be that, but not even the journalists go there. And then it just gets dismissed. For me, just putting a spotlight on Arminda de Jesus and what she went through and the gruesome way that she died at the hands of friends and family, at her doorstep. And I don't know if her children weren't there, because everyone was there trying to pray for Joaquina's recovery, right? And she died like that, right? As long as I can, thank you so much for allowing me to shine a spotlight on her story, so that it becomes maybe it might be like that, she can get some rest, hopefully, on the other side. And more importantly, and I'm hoping that I can achieve that, I want to publish her in a proper journal, academic journal, so that someone can put her in a database, list her name, like we do with all our fallen soldiers and etc. on the wall. We put these names. These women, these victims of witch hunts, should deserve at least that, not just be forgotten, but known. This happened. So that's my ultimate objective, and I'm hoping that it resonates with people. That's all I can hope.
Thank you so much. That was a really powerful message there. So thank you.
And we look forward to updates on her, because there are going to be.
I will keep you updated. Yes.
You're just getting started. You've just gotten the ball rolling. It's just such an important story. It echoes through the ages. It's relevant now. We know there are thousands and thousands of stories that we see, that you have a woman persecuted, that it doesn't make sense. And often at the hands of loved ones and community that should be supporting. And so I'm so happy, even though happy isn't the word, that we know about her and that we're going to learn more about what happens so that we can stop this. We need to stop these persecutions against women because of fear.
Yeah, fear, and unfortunately superstition keeps on coming up, right? But and that people are more accountable. I just feel this lack of accountability also very staggering. Like these men who weren't not even 2 decades in prison, they killed her like that. My God. What would it be today? Slap on the wrist? But I don't know. It's, and Portugal, unfortunately, is also one of those countries where you have a lot of domestic violence still. Over 20 women just this past year died at the hands of ex-boyfriends, ex-husbands. I don't know if that also is a cultural element to it. I don't know. But like I said, for me, I am beyond ecstatic that you allowed me to do this. And I'm hoping that the spotlight on Arminda shining on her, that and her story, and that more people know about it, and just take the time to think about it. That's all. I'm already happy with that. So thank you very much again for this.
You're welcome, and thank you so very much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Inez.
And now Sarah has End Witch Hunts news.
End Witch Hunts brings you this message. As we close this examination of witch hunts, I want to acknowledge that this was recorded on the ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples, lands that have witnessed their own histories of persecution and survival. The patterns we've uncovered in our research, the spread of suspicion, the targeting of outsiders, the abuse of power, they are not confined to a single time or space. While we focus on witch hunts, these same mechanisms of fear and control have played out repeatedly across history, including on the very ground where we record. May the voices of those who were silenced, both in our witch hunt narratives and in the history of this land, be fully heard and recognized. As many gather this week in the United States to share meals and togetherness, we hold gratitude for the Indigenous peoples who have long called this land home, who shared their wealth, traditions, and knowledge with us. The United States Department of the Interior, Bureau of Indian Affairs, has posted this on their website. National Native American Heritage Month is celebrated each year in November. It is a time to celebrate the traditions, languages, and stories of Native American and Alaska Native communities and ensure their rich histories and contributions continue to thrive with each passing generation. This November and every month, we celebrate the culture and heritage of these remarkable Americans who deeply enrich the quality and character of our nation. We celebrate Indian country with its remarkable diversity of American Indian and Alaska Native cultures and peoples while remembering and honoring our veterans who have sacrificed so much to defend our nation. Our theme is weaving together our past, present, and future. We will focus on the failed policies of the past with a focus on the federal Indian boarding schools and moving into the present and the work being done to address the intergenerational trauma Native people face. In partnership with the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Smithsonian Institution, we are working to record the lasting impacts of that era and share that information with all Americans. As Indigenous people, our past, present, and future are all connected.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of Witch Hunt.
Join us every week.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.